Hello and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, personalities, everyday users. And the goal is to have a discussion with each one to talk about their journey into Linux and beyond. Join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and with me today is my friend Dan Simmons. How are you, Dan?
Doing well, Rocco.
All right, so Dan, for people that don't know, you are a BDLL community member. You are also part of the Ubuntu development team, and you help out sometimes, like when we travel to go to Self, and you help with the show itself, producing it and streaming it. So that is very much appreciated, sir.
I'm happy to help.
All right. So besides all of that, who is Dan Simmons?
All right. So I'm a husband. I've been married to my wife for 19 years. We have two children. My daughter is 16 and my son is 13. The kids are very active in school activities and sports, so that keeps us quite busy.
Yep, I'm sure.
Yeah. By the way, my son does run Linux on his laptop, so he's
wait,
a Linux user.
He did a by the way. That's not an Arch reference, right?
No. He doesn't run Arch, but he does use Linux. So
you're teaching him right.
Absolutely. Got to start somewhere. I'm also an amateur radio operator or a ham operator, though I'm not as active as I once was in the past. But I've been licensed since 1997. So,
wow.
Yeah. And, I enjoy camping and hiking with the kids. And, I try to get out and walk when I can. I try to walk to work a couple times a week at least. So get some exercise. So,
yeah, that's always a plus, man, when you're able to do that. But you said you're a ham radio operator. So they had the testing down at Self to become, ham radio operators. And Tyler passed his test for, I guess, the beginning stages of it. So how deep were you into this?
So they've changed over the time. Now there's 3 license classes. Tyler took his technician test, which is the entry level. I'm at the general level, which is like the next step. And, that gives you more operating privileges and whatnot. And then the final stage in that, is the extra, and I'm not there yet. There's a lot more technical involved in it, and I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. So
you're not just going to get on there and just start being a ham radio operator. There's rules and regulations and stuff you got to follow. There
is, and they want you to operate a certain way, and it keeps we're self-policing for the most part, so. Mm-hmm. It keeps things clean and operating smoothly.
Very nice. All right. So before we get into Linux, let's go back to the beginning of your computer time. So and this is like one of my favorite questions because everybody's got a different answer, but what was the first computer you touched?
All right. So I started really young, probably 5 or 6. And, we had a Commodore VIC-20, which is a long time ago.
A long time ago.
And, I don't remember a ton about it because I was pretty young, but I do remember we had these books. They were like programming books. And I remember sitting down, entering programs in, and then you had to save them on cassette tapes. You actually had like a cassette recorder thing that attached to your VIC-20. And you had to save them on there, and then you could load them back up. And it was a lot of fun. And there were games and stuff that you could enter in. And I remember just kind of messing around with the color codes randomly, and just to see what would happen. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah. Well, it says the VIC-20 was released in 1980, and it has 20 kilobytes of ROM and 5 kilobytes of RAM.
Yeah.
So it was even expandable up to 32 kilobytes.
It was. You had this cartridge thing that you could put in the back of it, and that would expand it.
It's so awesome to hear people talk about like their first computers, because I mean, obviously I don't go back that far, you know what I mean, but my computers I think started in I had the first computer I had a 20 gigabyte hard drive in it, so like that was like super at the time, you know, like that was ridiculous, so you would never even get close to using that. So
no, that's huge.
It was huge.
You know, growing up, we always had computers in the house. I can't really remember, you know, when we always had one. And that was at a time when it just wasn't popular for a lot of people to have them. You know, it was in its infancy.
Yep.
You know, my mom was a computer programmer, so technology was like always around.
Wow.
It was encouraged. And even my dad, who worked in manufacturing, he even encouraged it. You know, he didn't use computers in his day job, but he was always encouraging that
right.
You know, the early days we're all DOS based, and then we moved on to Windows, and you know, eventually evolved into Linux.
So you're coming at this from a technical computer background user. You're not just an everyday user. You know, I don't know how that would be growing up and having your mom be in programming and stuff. That must have been awesome at the time.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that was a time when, you know, women weren't really in technology, but, you know, I didn't realize that when I was growing up.
Right.
It was fantastic. Yeah, so I went to college for electrical technology, you know, electronics sort of thing. So, and just kind of always had an interest in the technical side of things. You know, I have to thank my dad for the mechanical side of things too. So I've always kind of been interested in hardware. You know, and you know, now I'm a host and network services manager, which is I oversee 3 different areas. We have a team of system administrators, and we manage nearly 200 different physical and virtual servers for a college.
Wow. It's a big job, dude.
Yeah. And then, you know, we have a team that does the network infrastructure and works on the multimedia stuff for the classrooms. And, you know, I think we're up to, you know, 80 different classrooms that we have technology deployed in. They maintain all the projectors and the control systems and audio systems that go into those. And they manage, you know, all of the cabling infrastructure. I mean, there's hundreds of miles of cable that gets installed for Ethernet.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. Jeez.
It's crazy. Every room basically has a network drop and gets connected. We've got also managed the telephone infrastructure group, and we've got 1,700 voice over IP phones that they all sit on the network.
Yeah.
And then add to all that, my primary responsibility is to manage the network and the network switching and all the different VLANs and routing and firewalls that sit there. We've got probably about 170 different switch stacks that are sitting out on our network and 650 wireless access points. So it's a lot to keep going.
I'm sure it is. Now, I don't know if you've seen it, but on the episode with Adam Grubbs, he talked about being in the Atlanta school system for public school. And he talked about like in the beginning, you know, in the morning when people start, you know, the classroom starts and the whole network just blows up because everybody's opening their Chromebooks or whatever at the time. How is that in the morning for you? Like, I mean, obviously it's a college, it's a little different, but
it is. It's kind of a slower ramp up, but you can really see things change as the day progresses. And we've done some work in the recent past to help that scale. So most of our network stacks are on a 10 gig backbone or 20 gig lags.
right.
To help with all of that. So we've really done some work in that area. We've also had to increase our internet bandwidth too, And now we've got an Internet 2 connection, which allows for direct connection to content delivery networks and other universities. So the latency comes down quite a bit. So that helps a lot with connection speeds and timeouts and stuff like that.
Right. Now, he mentioned, sometimes they would have to like block certain websites in order to like slow down the traffic a little bit. Is that something that you run into or no?
For the most part, no. Sometimes like when updates come down, it's you have to kind of limit those a little bit, especially Apple updates. People bring in their iPhones and our iPads, and it really hits it pretty hard until we have caching servers deployed around the campus. And once the image is, set on the caching servers, then we can locally distribute it. And that helps a lot too.
Oh, so it's basically like a staging area.
Yep. It helps.
Awesome. I love it. All right. So, when like that, you talked about your computer background. When was the first time you heard the word Linux?
All right. So it was probably the mid 90s. And I'm sure I read about it in like a PC magazine or something like that. I mean, I subscribed to a couple of different magazines, which was, the internet was in its infancy. There really wasn't a whole lot. You could dial up into like a BBS or something like that, but there wasn't a whole lot around. So, definitely subscribed to some magazines. The other one that I really loved was Computer Shopper. I don't know if you remember those.
No.
They were the huge books. It was like a telephone book that came every month. It was fantastic. I mean, you flip through, you could see all the different hardware that was coming down and different computer systems and whatnot. It was a fantastic thing.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you hear about it in a magazine. Like, how do you make that step to hear about it in a magazine to wanting to try it on actual hardware?
So I'm in this CompUSA and I see this Red Hat box. It was probably 3 or something like that. It was really early. It was before they had transitioned to Fedora Core. And so before any of the enterprise Linux or any of that stuff. So it was just plain Red Hat. And so I'm looking at that and I've got to take it home. I've got to try it. It's begging me to bring it.
It was calling you, huh?
It was calling me. It was something different. I wanted to try something different than Windows or DOS. And I just had to go.
So like, did you have any reservations about jumping right in, or you just wanted to try it out?
I'm sure I was a little nervous, but I knew I could reinstall Windows or whatever because I'd done that before because I'd messed with that enough times to mess that up. So I had to reinstall. So I was pretty comfy with that at that point. So I knew I had a backup plan. I wasn't, it wasn't the end of the world. If it didn't work, I just reinstall.
Right. Yeah, I think everybody that comes from Windows, I don't know about everybody, but in my experience, I think everybody has that backup plan in their mind to say, what, I'll just reinstall Windows and it'll be good if it doesn't work out. So, yeah. All right. So what was the good things about that first experience and maybe some of the bad things?
Well, I mean, it was different, and that in itself was really interesting. But the early days were really rough. The graphics were like basic. Icons were rough. The Windows was different looking, and the hardware support was lacking. So, probably had issues getting my sound card to work, or, video was funny or something. And, I was like, how do I play my games? Where are my games?
Where are my games at?
But, it kept me intrigued. I wanted more. And so, it wasn't until later that I realized some of the freedom that you had to develop things on your own. So,
yeah. Well, when I first tried Linux, I had installed it and, opened it in the file manager and everything, and it was all cool. But like, I couldn't figure out how to get access to my files that I had over on Windows. And it was like, this is cool and all, but like, I don't have none of my stuff over here. So I eventually went back to Windows for that time frame, but all right. How long did it take for you to make that jump from the first time you tried it, installed it, to running it on a daily basis?
Yeah. So I'm, I played around with it for a little while, but I know I quickly went back to Windows for a while because it was in its infancy. So about the time Red Hat 9 came down, I was started dual booting. It was right before the transition to Fedora Core. And so I eventually rolled it into that, did an upgrade and got there. So I was playing around with it a lot more and flipping back and forth. So yeah. And then one, day at work, there's a student there and he was handing out these Ubuntu 5.10 CDs. And
I love it.
I'm like, I have no idea anything about this, but I'm going to take it home and try it. And so he had stacks of them. I don't even know who the kid was. He's long since graduated now. So I thought, why not? I gotta go give it a whirl. And so after that, I've always had a dedicated machine to Linux. And for the most part, I've run Ubuntu based distros. So,
but I think that's so great that, okay, you may not know who that person is anymore, but that guy's out there handing out CDs to people to have them try Linux. That's like what we need today. We don't have to hand out CDs anymore, but to be able to promote Linux, anybody can do it. You know what I mean? It's so awesome that he would do that behind the scenes. He's not getting any credit for anything. Nope. He's just, talking about Linux.
And it was at a time when, viruses were really running crazy and everybody was getting infected. And so you were installing your machine anyway, even if you didn't want to. And so here was this Linux thing that you could install on there and it didn't get viruses. You could just run it. It was great.
Yep. All right. So you have had one Linux machine at home dedicated for Linux only, but do you have any test machines that you may consider yourself a distro hopper on?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But in the early days, it wasn't even just Linux. I hopped to different operating systems entirely.
Really?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So, I did OS2 Warp, FreeBSD, OpenBSD, OpenSolaris. I even did BOS for a while, if you know what that is.
I don't know what that is.
All right. That's morphed into the Haiku project now, if you want to check that out at some point. And I ran that for a while. And so some of my experiments were great and others not so much. Never going back to those. It was a quick next.
Right. So so some of them were great. Was there one or two that was pretty decent that you would be able to stick with? Say if Linux fell off the face of the earth, well, no, not Linux is going to fall off the face of the earth, but if you needed to use one of these other ones, would there be one that you would pick?
You could probably sit me down in front of anything and I could probably run it. But I guess BSD is probably the closest thing to Linux. If I had to pick one, so I'm not really afraid to try any different distro or desktop environment. Though these days I tend to stick to the Qt environments.
Right. Well, that's funny you say that because when I distro hop, and I don't distro hop on the main machine anymore, but when I test things on the test machine, I'm usually using it the way they intended you to use it. I'm usually I'm easy to please. If it's there, I can run it. And I try to figure out what the developer wanted you to use it as. So I think that's awesome that you can do the same thing and just sit down and use it.
Yeah, I agree. I like to try when I'm testing, I like to try to use the defaults and see, what is intended here and how does it work? And most of the time, Linux has come a long way. It's pretty comfortable and I can get right in there and use it.
Yep. Well, even so far as when I started out, I was KDE. I was KDE for years. And, recently I've been on GNOME and Pop OS. And that took a little bit to get used to because it's obviously not like KDE Plasma, but I wanted to get used to how their workflow, and I know Zeb will love that term workflow, but how their workflow is and how they wanted you to use it. And, you get used to like keyboard centric things like GNOME, where Plasma can be if you
Right.
want it to be, but by default, it's not so keyboard centric. And I think that's a great thing to be able to just sit down and use it for the way it's intended to be used.
Yep, I agree.
You learn new things that way.
Absolutely.
So what did you finally land on then? Desktop wise, distro wise?
All right. So I've been running Ubuntu on my main machine for just about a year now. Yeah. And so it'll be a year in September. It was right before the, 1810 release. They were switching to LXQT. And it's a comfortable environment. It's flexible, but it's simple enough that I can get my work done and feel quite comfortable.
Right.
The team supporting Ubuntu are great people, and they're very welcoming. Walter and Simon have really welcomed me, and I think we all get along very well. Everyone is eager to get right in there, and we've started up a forum, and we try to get the questions answered there. If you ever think of joining an open source project, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better one.
That's awesome. And that's made up, that whole, what you just talked about is made up of the people, the community itself in leadership there. So they're making that environment. They're making that friendly environment where they're open to new people, and, you can help out and not be looked at as someone new and stuff. So yeah,
There
awesome.
is something for everyone. You don't have to be a coder or, whatnot. You can get in there and even just provide help in the forums or in the IRC. We've got our own manual. So,
you hear that, Ryan? They got a manual you need to read.
You can get in there and help with that too. I mean, so there literally is something for everyone. And it's very community based. So
that's awesome. It's awesome that they foster that whole community thing. So, all right. I hate to ask this question, Dan, but do you still use anything like Windows or Mac?
All right. So at work, I still manage Windows machines and servers. So I do occasionally have to use Windows. I don't dual boot, but I do have a VM, and we also have Macs on campus too. So I have to be somewhat familiar with them. I don't use those on a regular basis so much, but definitely have to be familiar with all of that and how it interacts with, the services we offer. So I'm pretty comfortable there, at least on the Windows side of things. And, at home, my wife and my daughter, they're still running Windows machines. So
right.
I got to help them too.
Well, hey, that's the way it is. I am not a person that demands people use a certain operating system. So if you need to use Windows, you need to use Windows. But why are you not switching your college over to Linux?
Well, we do. I don't know. I mean, it's hard for a lot of the average people probably to come in and just sit down and do that. We do our computer science lab. They have a whole lab full of Linux machines. That's what they use, because they're sitting there, they're doing programming and whatnot all day long. So, they're comfortable with it. So we have pockets of it around. Yeah, but you're right. You have to use what works for you. And that's the way it's got to be.
Right now, it's mostly Windows at that college. So that's the way it is.
Yep.
All right. I know this buzzword will be talked about by PZ, but what is your daily workflow, and what software do you need to have to be able to do that workflow?
So my needs are pretty basic, really. I use the terminal a ton, so I've got to have a terminal emulator. Most of the time I'm, SSH'd into some switch or server or something. So that's where I really need that. I need some sort of web browser. Personally, I prefer Firefox. It's open source, so that's kind of great.
Right.
And I think it performs really well. So that works for me. Need some sort of text editor. I personally use Vim.
Oh, the age-old battle of the text editor.
Everybody's got their preference there. That's almost like a religion. But I use Vim. And then, to keep in touch with people, I'm using Telegram and Quassel for IRC. And I use Simple Note quite a bit to keep my notes. That way I can keep them synced between my phone and my computer, and any computer. I can log in on the web even. It's pretty great.
Right.
So pretty much you can seize the world with that combination.
Some people can seize the world with that combination. You may be able to. I don't think I would be able to seize the world, but all right. Yep. So your software that you use, you said about the browser and Firefox, but it seems to me that you're the type of guy that even though you use Firefox, you could probably get along with any browser as long as it's a browser and it connects to the web.
Yeah, I think so. I could use Chrome or Chromium and get by just fine with those. I also keep on my machines, I keep Qt Browser, which is Vim key binding based, and that works pretty well too. Just for basic stuff, I'll throw it up there and then I can have it in another screen or something.
Right. Is there any software that is not available in Linux that you want to see come to Linux?
So the biggest thing I have to use at work is Skype for Business. I really hate firing up my Windows VM just for that. It's super annoying, but it's the only tool that you can, join those Skype for Business meetings.
Right.
And so I got to have that.
Yeah, it's a shame that there's just always that one piece of program. Now, it's gotten way better. Absolutely. And, that used to be true in pretty much every circumstance in Linux, where there was always that one piece of software that we didn't have on Linux. But It's gotten way better, but it still seems there's just those one or two things that are lagging behind that you wish came to Linux.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different video conferencing things and whatnot that are available now. But, for specific meetings, you've got to use, the certain tool set. So
right,
that's where you're kind of stuck.
Yep, pretty much. So you use Linux at home. Do you use it for work? Do you use it for leisure? Do you use it for gaming? What is it you use it for total?
Oh, all the above. I play games on my desktop at home. I use it at work. I'm using it on my desktop at work. It just works really well for me. I have no issues. Like I said, my needs are basic somewhat, but it's kind of the best. When I get to work, I've got my screens set up the way I want them. And I'm good to go.
So I hope it doesn't negatively impact your job using Linux at work, and you have to work on, Windows servers and Windows desktops and everything.
No, there's enough tools that I can remote into a Windows server and use it just like I was using it on Windows. It really has come a long way. I use Ramina for the most part for my RDP sessions. And but there's other ones too, and once you get remoted in, it's like you're sitting in front of the console anyway.
Right. So what kind of games are you? What kind of gamer are you? You FPS, or are you a MMORPG, or what?
For the most part, FPS, but usually I'm tracing the grout lines on the floor or counting the ceiling tiles. So that's me. But I've played some Civilization as well. I mean, that's kind of that you can really suck some time away with that, and it's something that you can put down and come back to and pick it up right where you left off. So that's pretty great.
Yeah, and that's not true of all genres and all games, because especially FPS and stuff like that. If you're not practicing every day, you're not going to be the same. So,
exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely more fun and relaxing to play those kind of games. But
yeah, I like getting on with everybody and playing, even if I'm not the greatest.
But that's the reason we play games, is to enjoy them. I think some people get to the point where if they're not at the top of the scoreboard, or if they're not beating everybody in every area, they're like disappointed. But the games are there to give you enjoyment, and that's the most important thing. It doesn't matter if you're on the floor. If you're having fun playing and you're with friends, who cares?
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so obviously you've been using Linux for a long time. What drives that love for Linux in your mind, as far as, I love this product because it's flexible, open?
For me, yeah. So for me, it's the freedom of choice. It's the freedom to make it better. You can do that without restriction. You can't change the Windows environment or the Mac OS environment. It's what they deliver to you. But if you want to change something in Linux, you can get right in there and change it if you want. And there's enough options out there that you can pick the thing that is best for you. And the other thing is, the people surrounding all these great projects is fantastic as well. And when you're working on it, it's collaborative efforts. Everybody works together to keep the thing moving forward.
Yep. I think, we talk about, obviously this show is spotlighting the community, but the community is everybody that uses Linux. It's made up of those developers that are working on it, and it's made up of everyday users out there and people like you who want to customize things and stuff like that. And it is a collaborative effort and goes back to that guy who handed you that CD. Yep. I mean, it's just a community effort, and yeah, I love it.
I had no idea at the time, but it's really changed my life.
All right. So, are you into like coding at all?
So not so much. I don't do a ton of coding. I mean, I can follow along in most programming to know what's going on. But to sit down and start a program and write it, that's not me. I'm not your guy there.
Right. All right. Well, using it at work, using it at home, using it for many years, you have had to run into problems running Linux and then solve them. So like, how did that feel, and what was the most exciting problem you solved?
So I have to go back to the early days when I first started using Linux. It was the days of dial-up internet still. And so I had created a local network between my computer and my brother's computer. He was running Windows. And so when either one of us wanted to go online, we either, we could only do it one at a time. So after I created this network, I set it up so I had this script that my modem could dial into the internet, and then we could share it together. And
wow.
It was amazing. And so at that point, I realized how powerful, the networking that was built into the tool already.
Right.
You didn't have to, install anything else or any of that. You could just share your network connection. And that's so trivial these days. Everybody's doing that. And you don't even think about it. But back then, that was just amazing. We had one dial-up connection going out, and we could both surf the web.
So you were a hacker.
More or less.
All right. For those that want to learn about Linux and whatever, coding or anything that you're looking at, what do you consider as the best source of information for people to go to? Is it forums? Is it YouTube? Is it wikis?
All right, so that's manual.lubuntu.me. That's a big shout out to Lynn, because she's really put a lot into that. But no, seriously, don't stop at one source. I think you need to use all of them. Everybody learns differently, so you need to find a format that really works well for you, whether
Right.
that's a video, or if you're seriously, if you're reading a manual is what sticks in your mind, then yeah, by all means you can look up the problem that you're having and read it there. But And if that doesn't work, get into the IRC chat rooms or the forums or Telegram channels. There's so many different sources out there that, eventually you're going to find the thing that works for you. And I think the people that are out there are good and they're willing to help. So,
well, unfortunately, not too much sticks in my mind anymore, but I think you're absolutely right.
That's the nice thing about having something written down is you can go back and you can refer to it over and over again and it'll jog your memory.
Yep. Because everybody learns differently, man. And it's good to combine, if I could talk, if you could combine all of that together and learn little bits and pieces, because not every wiki is going to have every detail, every nuance. A video might have a little bit more than that, or a forums might be able to answer a specific question related to your specific hardware or your specific problem. So I don't think there's one source. I think it's just all of the above.
I agree. Yeah.
All right. So in your experience, how has the Linux community been overall?
I think for the most part, friendly, up until for the longest time, I had my head in the sand and just kind of put my head down and did my own thing, not really interacting with a lot of people outside my bubble. But I don't know what made me look up, but, I think probably the Big Daddy channel was probably one of the first ones I found when I did finally pick my head up. And, I'm watching a BDLL episode and I'm seeing these people. And I'm like, wow, there's really other people out there that are just like me.
That want to talk about the same things I want to talk about.
Yeah, they want to get right into it. And, I try to surround myself with people that are good. So, I like to think I can get along with just about anybody. And, if you're offering help for somebody else, they're willing to give it right back to you.
Yep. And the Telegram groups are, they're the example of that, because there isn't a time where you can go into the BDLL Telegram group, the Destination Linux Telegram group, or any of the others that somebody will ask a question and you'll get an RTFM. You're not going to get that. You're going to actually get help. And maybe at one time, the community was pretty toxic. But I think we have made definite great strides in bringing it to the point where anybody can ask a question, even if it's a question that you think somebody should know, and you're still going to get a great response from it.
And I think you can still probably encounter that at some places, but there's enough other places that you won't. I think if you just turn around and find another one, you'll be okay.
Well, you mentioned you think that can still happen, and I agree, it can still happen. But what do you think we can do as a community to make it a better experience for somebody?
I think you got to give people guidance. You got to show them, what can be done. You got to be willing to give them the information that but be honest about the flaws that are there. It's not perfect, but just be willing to let them know. You don't have to be evangelical, because that's kind of annoying. There's that can be off-putting, and someone pushing their agenda. But you have to be objective and informative at the same time. And you have to listen to what they have to tell you.
You have to be the example for people, for even other community members, to show that you're willing to go the extra mile and help people out in this. And I think the community that you're fostering, Rocco, really exemplifies that. Well, the community that BDLL has is absolutely awesome, and that's why we're spotlighting them. So, all right, give me one thing about Linux that maybe you hate or dislike.
So there's definitely a learning curve, and I don't care who you are. If you have not used it, it's going to be different. But if you come into it with an open mind, I think you can. I mean, anytime you make a change, it's going to be different. I love that there's choice. If for some reason you feel like changing your desktop environment, you can just do it. And That's pretty fantastic.
Well, that was my next question. What is something that you love about the Linux desktop? And I think that is absolutely fantastic that there is so much choice, that you can pretty much have what you want.
I agree. There's pros and cons to everything. And I think the pros outweigh the cons.
If you could change one thing, what would it be?
I think it would be great if software producers, people that make different software packages, treated Linux as a first-class citizen. Don't get me wrong, it's come a long way. There's a lot more software than there used to be, but sometimes it's an afterthought, the Linux environment. It would be nice to see, every application released for Linux just as much as Mac OS or Windows.
Right. I think in order to get there, the developers themselves would have to see a monetary value there. But I think that is so important that we are considered as a first-class citizen, because there are so many. It's this age-old thing that, number one, every Linux user wants every piece of software for free. And it's just, to me, it's so untrue, because I see so many people who use Linux that are so willing to donate to developers or programs or whatever, to projects, and they're so willing to I won't say they're so willing to, I'll say there's a trend that they are willing to pay for a piece of software if it's something they need. And I think if we could get that message out to developers, I think it would be a good thing.
And I agree. If it's a superior piece, then there's no reason why you wouldn't get a following even in Linux.
Yep. All right. So, Dan, where do you think Linux is headed? Are we headed for, where the Linux desktop is all over the place? Or are we headed to everybody using Chromebooks?
I don't know. I mean, the old man in me has a hard time believing that the desktop computing will ever go away. But, the use is dwindling. A lot of people have laptops and tablets and stuff like that, but for the most part, people are really happy with good enough computing experiences. They just want to be able to read their stuff on the web, check their email, shop online, stream, their video entertainment down, the Netflix and the Hulu and all that stuff. But you don't need a powerful desktop computer for that anymore. You can do that on just about any device.
Right.
I'm kind of encouraged about some products that are on the horizon to fill that. I mean, for example, take the Pine Tab and the Pine Book Pro.
Yeah.
That's kind of an average everyday person computing device. And we can probably get that in the hands of people because it's a little more affordable, maybe.
Well, maybe it's just a optimistic dream, but I don't see the Linux desktop going away. I still think there will always be that use case for the Linux desktop. But you're right. There's so many people out there that as long as they can just browse the web and watch videos online, and geez, you can even do that from your phone nowadays.
Yeah.
That having a desktop is like a tie down sometimes for people.
Yeah, I agree.
So now, you mentioned laptops. That would still help out with the use of Linux, but you got so many other options out there, like tablets and Macs and all these other items that you can choose from. I don't know, we'll see.
Yep.
Like I said, maybe it's my optimistic view, but we'll have to let it play out. All right, Dan, so thinking back, you chose Linux, you said, because it was different and you could do what you wanted, and any other reasons that you had at that time for choosing Linux. When you think back to that, do those reasons that you chose to use Linux still apply to you today?
Yeah, they do. It's still different. It's still got some freedom. I enjoy my Linux experience far more than the other operating systems. So I don't see myself moving away anytime soon. I think, you know, it just works for me. I know that's a meme, but it does. It's just great.
Well, okay, but going back to, we talked about those people who just want to browse the web or just want to watch videos. That works for them.
Mhm.
And that's exactly what you're saying with Linux. What you
Exactly.
need it for, it works.
Yep.
So, all right. Is there anything else you want to share with people?
Well, don't be afraid to get involved in some project somewhere. Help out others when you can. Be welcoming. Foster the community that really is the great thing. Whether that's filing bug reports for developers so that you can improve your experience and everybody else's. Just offer and sometimes just offer encouragement to different developers and projects. Everybody wants to hear that something is going right and that it's working for you. That helps keep the project moving.
Well, we as people tend to only speak up by default. We tend to only speak up when something's going wrong.
Yeah.
If something's going smooth, it's we don't say much.
Right. And that's the thing that sticks in your mind probably more than anything is when you have a bad experience.
Yeah. Yep. But that is an excellent point, that it make an effort to say to that developer or search out that developer who develops on a program that you use every day and just say thank you to them. Goes
Absolutely.
a long way.
I agree.
All right, Dan. So how can people get in touch with you?
You can find me in the BDLL, Destination Linux, Tux Digital, Geek Lab, Ubuntu Podcast, Telegram channels. You can find me on IRC in the Big Daddy Linux Live channel. You'll see me in the Ubuntu support and development channels. I'm also on Twitter and Mastodon. And so you can reach out to me at either of those as well.
Which do you find better, or not better? Which do you find you enjoy using more, Twitter or Mastodon?
I tend to stick to Mastodon more than Twitter. I'm on a Mastodon instance that is made for technology professionals, so the information over there is probably a little more pertinent to me.
Yep. All right. I find myself using Twitter more than Mastodon, and that's probably a downfall of mine, but that's the way it is. All right. That wraps up our discussion. Dan, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for inviting me on, Rocco.
All right. Thank you for joining us today as we spotlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux. All right, here's a community question for you. Is your toilet paper over or under?
All right, so I was a Boy Scout, so it's always got to be over. I mean, you got to keep that high, dry, and in the clear.
High, dry, and in the clear. Now, my dad was in the Boy Scouts, but I've never heard that saying, so I'll take your word for that.
It's sacred stuff.
Sacred stuff. All right, I love it.